Welcome to the Multiply Your Success podcast, where each week we help growth-minded entrepreneurs and franchise leaders take the next step in their expansion journey. I'm your host, Tom Dufour, CEO of Big Sky Franchise Team, and as we open today, I'm wondering how well you know the profitability of your business. And do you really know how much money you're making or not? And it's a regular challenge I've found with entrepreneurs over the years of helping them grow their companies. And our guest today is Marley Major, who shares with us some of the best practices on helping ensure your business is making the money you think it is and hope it is. Now, Marley is the mastermind behind her business, The Party Goddess, and is renowned for orchestrating events for elite clientele such as Snoop Dogg, Pierce Brosnan, and Vanessa and Nick Lachey. Her insightful book, But Are You Making Money?, has made her a sought-after coach in the small business realm, helping entrepreneurs navigate modern business challenges and trends. Beyond her own writing, she has contributed to several influential works on leadership and entrepreneurship and is a regular guest on many of the nation's top podcasts, including ours today, the Multiply Your Success podcast. So let's go ahead and jump right into my interview with Marley Major.
I'm Marley Major, and my title is The Boss, and my company is The Profit Goddess.
I love it. The Profit Goddess. Well, I think money is a topic we're talking about today, and a book that you've written that asks, but are you making money? So I'd love for you to just give us some context here about maybe a little overview on the book and some context behind that.
Sure. So I'm a serial entrepreneur, but my core business is a celebrity-based catering and event planning company called The Party Goddess. And my dad is a seasoned entrepreneur. And after being in business and partners with him since I was 22, after I started The Party Goddess and was saying, oh yes, and we're doing this event for Britney Spears, and we're doing the opening of the Hollywood Bowl, and we're doing blah, blah, blah. Him, being a businessman, was just like, okay, but are you making any money? I was like, well, and he was like, Marley, how much is in your bank account? How much did you make last year? What are your margins? These are very simple questions. And I remember just being like, they are so simple. I've been to business school. I have a business degree. I need to know, but for some reason, I had a really difficult time making the connection between what I had learned and actually applying it to my own business. Now, I could apply it to everybody else's business. So at the end of the day, I was like, this is the last time I want to have this conversation where I don't know the answers to these questions. And guess what? And then I decided I need to figure it out, how to make money, but have it be simple. And then I ended up, coming up with my system and then writing a book about it because everybody's like, oh my gosh, if this train wreck can do it, anybody can. So how'd you do it? And that's the context. That's where it came from, is the question my dad asked me.
Simple wisdom, right? Something like that. It's a few simple questions like, oh, wow, goodness. And here you are. So let's talk through a little bit about some of the highlights in the book and
Sure.
the process that you went through then to start transforming and changing your business.
The key piece of the book is really, it starts with a very humble story, because I have had huge highs in my business and been in every magazine, People Magazine and Us Weekly and Wall Street Journal and every major TV network. But at the end of the day, I've also had a lot of doses of humble pie. And so the book basically starts with the humble pie and is kind of identifying with the audience and saying, hey, listen, if you're picking up this book because you're not making enough money in your business, or you're working so hard, but you don't feel like you have anything to show for it, then guess what? This book is for you. I'm for you. I understand no matter what my life looks like on social media. Here's the reality. I was struggling. I promise you I owed more money than you guys could even imagine. And I figured it out. And here's how I did it. And then I go through this very simple step-by-step process. And the reason it had to be so simple was because, first of all, I hated numbers, even though I went to business school. Now I love numbers. But I just was like, I want to focus on the creative components of my business, right? I want to focus on my clients and making these beautiful events and getting the press. Well, that's great. But if you don't focus on having a profit, then you are in a nonprofit, which is no problem with that, or you have a hobby. And so what I did was when I did tons and tons and tons of research about what are the key factors, to running a profitable business. Some of them were obvious. Overhead. Okay, great. So I put it down to the A's, B's, C's, and D's. And I said, okay, you have your cost of goods sold. So you have a dress, you have the fabric, the zippers, whatever, cost of goods sold. But then the piece that I always seemed to miss was time, the B's, B category. C's were the forget-me-nots. Like, yeah, that's great that you have the zippers and the fabric, but if you forget to order them on time, you got to FedEx them, and that's a little factor that we all forget. And then D is overhead. And a lot of times people don't get in trouble with overhead. I found they got really in trouble with the time component. And so what I wanted to do is change the conversation around time, because anytime I asked anybody, or you could ask somebody now, how are you doing? They're like, busy, just so busy. I was like, if everybody's so busy, my goodness, we should all be driving cars paid for in cash and have no mortgages, right? Because that's how much we're working. But we didn't have the result. And so I wanted to peel back exactly why we didn't have the result and what you can do about it. And it's not difficult. Just got to do it.
I like 3 and 4 that you discussed there. And I'd like to talk about those separately. I think 4 is a big category.
Yep.
I'd like to drill in a little bit on item 3, these forget-me-nots, as you described them.
Right.
I find that very interesting. And I am very guilty of the forget-me-nots. I am intrigued just to have further conversation on those. And I'd love for you to expand on that.
When you talk about cost of goods sold, let's say, and as I say, you talk about, okay, I'm a dressmaker, and you have the obvious things. And so it's so easy to open a business blog or something and say, okay, it says I'm supposed to list my costs. All right, so you list these out, but then especially as we get to the point where we start having an assistant help us, and then we say to the assistant, or maybe we, cut and paste some notes about the cost of something, we don't think to write the shipping cost, or we don't think to write the setup charge, or we don't think, and so we're so busy moving quickly through, I saw that on the internet, we can get those for $5.95. And then we list $5.95. But there are a bunch of different components that affect this. Well, it's $5.95 if you order 200 or more. Maybe you don't need to order 200. Or it's $5.95 as long as you can wait for the shipping to be there in 2 weeks. Maybe you can't wait for the shipping to be. So now it's going to be overnighted. That's where the businesses get you. So what it is it's about taking one step further. It isn't just how much is that item per X. It's what are the setup fees, the additional charges, et cetera. And the point is just that you take those into consideration. And when you take them into consideration, then to do your pricing, your whole world will change, because it's not the end of the world that shipping is $10 versus $40. Because let's say the client just got back to you late and said, I need all these dresses, but I need them next week. So what do? You just say, okay, well, here are the rush charges, and then you multiply them and you pass them on to the client. But as business owners, where we get stuck is that we don't take into consideration all those extra costs on our end, and then we don't pass them on to the consumer. So maybe the consumer's going to say, well, actually, I don't really need them Friday if it's going to cost that much. Tuesday is fine. Well, then guess what? You're back into a regular shipping quote, and the whole picture changes. But it's about knowing some key questions that are repetitive to ask, that how much extra, and then this other piece also, of course, of how much time is it going to take? Like, yeah, I can make something myself, right? And maybe it'll be, quote, less expensive. But if I factor in the time to make it, or what entrepreneurs do, right? I can just go pick it up. That's my favorite. I'll just go get it. And you're like, okay, you just went to get it. And we're, let's say in LA, you have traffic. You went there, you waited, you came back. That was an hour and a half of your time. Huge. Where are you factoring that into your pricing? And then you can't get anything else done either.
Let's say I'm in this spot, Marley. I've identified that I should not be going to pick up whatever supplies at the supply store. There are other ways it's worth spending the shipping to save my time. So it just shows up at my doorstep or at the office or wherever my place of business. Once I identify this, though, even though I've identified it, I still have found, and in myself and other entrepreneurs, that they struggle with the implementation of, they've got the know-how now, but they're not doing it. So
Right.
how do you kind of get over that hump of taking that step of just making it happen now?
It becomes much easier to get over when you actually write down your costs. And the reason I say write them down is because sometimes people are like, oh, a spreadsheet is too difficult to create, or people have excuses. So my answer is take a piece of paper and a pen if you need, or a pencil, and just write down the cost of the items, and then plus the shipping, plus. And I do an exercise in my book where I talk about take your last 3 projects or your last 3 products and reverse engineer them, right? So say to yourself, okay, yeah, and go through the receipts, and it'll take a minute to get used to it. But all you have to do is do this once or twice, and you realize, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that cost that, and there was that setup charge, and I never charged the customer. You do that a couple of times, and you realize, oh my gosh. And you realize, I don't need more clients. I don't need to work harder. I need to just work smarter. In fact, I just need to do a little more work on the front end and then build those costs into my product costs. And then once you do that, you're off to the races. It becomes second nature. I mean, now I could be drunk and asleep and call a vendor and say, great, how much? Okay, and what's the shipping? And is there a setup fee? And is there an extra charge? I don't know, is there a loading charge? You know how like you order furniture and then they say, so all these extras, like as long as they can just roll right in the front door from the driveway, no problem. But it's like if they have to go up a step, or God forbid it's on the second floor, extra. So what I encourage business owners to do is to anticipate what those extras could be and use that to increase their revenue.
I'd love for you to talk about some things that go on in this 4th step.
So first of all, what is overhead? And overhead is anything that it's your lease for your office space, or it's your internet or your telephone, all those things that you would have to have. This is the simplest way to break it down, that you must have in order to run your business. Okay. It doesn't matter if you have 1 customer or 1,000. So for example, I would need a Zoom subscription. I would need an internet. I would need, an office space, or even if it's a home office space, what would you need? You'd need, let's say, maybe business cards. You need your LinkedIn premium profile, all those things that are part of overhead. And a lot of times that doesn't get people into trouble, especially these days after COVID, because so many of us started working from home. So our overhead isn't tremendous. But what I have found is post-COVID is that where we've gotten in trouble with our overhead is all of these subscription fees that we all signed up for during COVID that were, just be on the Uber blah, blah, blah plan, and just be on the this, and pay ahead and you'll save 20%. So what I did was, now that it's post-COVID, I did an exercise where I went through just my subscriptions, and I almost choked, because guess what? All those notifications that say, your subscription plan is going to go up by this amount next month. And you're like, okay, whatever. You forgot how many subscription plans you have. And then guess what? Yours truly had 2 Apple IDs, just because I had one, I guess, really old one. Well, guess what? I had 2 subscriptions on each of them, depending on where I was logged in. So if you want an easy way to cut overhead, it's very simple. You go to your recurring credit card charges, or you go to your recurring bank debits. That's the best tip I can give you from this entire podcast interview. Go to that and just start reducing them. And the one thing somebody recommended to me was Rocket Money, which is, I think, a great app, because not only does it remind you, like urgent, you spent all this money this week, but it will automatically get rid of any of those subscriptions that you don't want. And then further to cut overhead, which I had no idea they did, is they will even go in and negotiate key charges for you. So for example, Spectrum, and they'll say, this seems a little high. We think we can negotiate it. Do you want us to negotiate it? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is so simple. So people don't even have any excuses anymore, right, to lower their overhead. And then really the advanced thing is, you want to lower your overhead, put a very well-crafted question into ChatGPT, and I promise you'll have 10,000 answers about how to lower your overhead. And keep in mind, when you lower your overhead, that's free money. Because so many people think, oh, if I have more customers and I do $1,000 more in sales, well, great, but then remove all of your costs. So you don't have $1,000 to put in your pocket. Maybe you have 100. But if you cut expenses, you cut $1,000 worth of expenses, you've got $1,000 every time to put in your pocket. And so it's a mindset shift. It isn't apples to apples in terms of revenue and expenses.
Great feedback. And as you're describing that, I'm thinking of just an entrepreneur, someone who ends up listening to this podcast. I can see them physically shaking their heads. Yes, Marley, I agree with you. But in their head, they're actually thinking, but it's just easier for me to go get some more sales. Like, can't I just increase revenue? Because that's an easier pathway in their mind than evaluating. And so what might you say to someone that is not going to externalize that thought, but probably like, well, can't I just get a few more customers? What might be a first step you'd suggest to help them get that nudge to say, actually, start doing some deep dive into where you're spending?
My initial response to your question is, what would I say? I would say you're wrong. It is absolutely not cheaper to go out and get more sales. Here's why. And I'm going to save you the deep dive into how much it costs to get a new customer, how much it costs to retain a customer, what the attrition rate, the natural attrition rates of customers are. That's why when you call, even if you don't use an external app, let's say you just call Spectrum or Verizon, which I have done many times, and you call and just say, hey, listen, is there a better program or special or anything you're running? The reason they will always negotiate with you. Have you ever noticed you cancel a subscription and then you cancel it and then you get all the flood of emails, come back, we'll give you a free month, come back. Why? They know it is too expensive, especially these days, to lose a customer. So the same thing is with you. Once you get a customer, you got to keep the customer. But guess what? For you to cut an expense and for you to cut $100 off your internet, that's $100 every single month, right? Or to save a little bit on your insurance. That's a huge chunk. And then you're not dealing. And then don't forget, when you get a customer, you have customer service inquiries, you have returns, you have all these things that big businesses have done a lot of research to figure out, oh my gosh, it's expensive. So that's the answer.
What's the best way for someone to get a copy of your book? They say, well, I like this concept. I like where she's going. I'd love to learn more. Where can they get a copy and find out more?
The easiest place, of course, is good old Amazon.com. And you can just search my name or you can search the title, But Are You Making Any Money? And you'll see me sitting on a chair with a buzzing bee because it's all busy, busy, busy. But where's the cash?
Well, this is a great time where we make a transition in the show and we ask every guest the same 4 questions. And the first question we ask is, have you had a miss or two on your journey and something you learned from it?
So my response to that would be, how much time do you have? Because I have had so many misses. And I think that's important to emphasize because no matter what these days things look like on social media where they say, oh, everything is so great. And so I promise you it's not. And all of us who have done really well have huge failures, whether we're willing to talk about them or not. And I have had plenty of huge failures. I would say one of them is trying to do too many different things, like chasing revenue streams instead of taking my own advice. I mean, now I take my own advice, but instead of saying, oh, I need to be this to this customer and I need to expand my product services and I need more Facebook ads and I need more. No, spend a little bit of time working on your business instead of in it. Spend some time pre-qualifying your customers. I didn't used to do that. And what would end up happening is we'd get these high maintenance customers who sapped all of our time. But if I just took a little bit of time to say, who are my key customers? Who are the ones that love working with me, that I love working with, that don't sap my time and that actually give me tons of referrals? So that kind of goes into, I know what's your next question, which is sort of, some good advice. But just keep in mind, you have to start somewhere. And we all have made so many mistakes. So as best you can do is be like, okay, what were they? I'm going to learn from them and I'm going to move on. And I know it's easier said than done.
Well, and you're right. The next question is, let's talk about a make or a highlight. So let's roll right into it here.
Sure. So the make or highlight, I would say, is to, kind of know yourself. And one of the things is I was diagnosed with ADHD, like, supposedly the whole world, but very, very, very late in my career. And what that has done for me, knowing that, is number one, I don't get as frustrated with myself. I still do, because I still think, oh, why can't I focus on this or that? Or why do I get so focused? But know yourself and your patterns. I do well waking up in the morning. I do well doing all my heavy lifting before, let's say, noon. I can crunch numbers. I can do all that stuff in the morning. No problem. You ask me to do that at 4 o'clock. I'm like, I don't know what 2 times 2 is. I have no clue, right? So know yourself, and then chunk your tasks and set your day around sort of your natural schedules. And then I would just give another little bonus one, is like habit stacking. We all have things that we hate to do. For me, I hate checking email, but I love taking baths, right? So I just said, some days when my email piles up, guess what? Not getting out of the bathtub until my emails are done. And there are many times when I have a 3.5 hour bath. So, but it's much more palatable than just sitting there complaining that I've got too many emails, or worse yet, not answering them.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about a multiplier that you've used to grow yourself personally, professionally, or businesses you've run.
My multiplier would be, ask yourself, what can you leverage about your business? And so an asset that you already have. I'm going to give a simple example, because so many of us are on social media, whether you're on LinkedIn or you're on Instagram, or let's say doing this podcast. So for example, look at something like, okay, I'm putting this time and energy and research into this podcast, to doing this podcast. Well, I can just say, okay, great, thank you, promote it, that's that. Or what I can do afterwards is I can say, hey, listen, I put this time into it. How can I leverage this to go into so many different places and work for me time and time again? I could turn this podcast into a blog. I could post my own YouTube shorts. I could post reels on my Instagram account. I could do, live comments afterwards about how great it was to be on the podcast. I could put things on the website, right? So that I improve my SEO. So think of bang for the buck. What can you do that's going to have the highest rate of return, and focus on that, instead of, oh, I need to book another podcast and I need to do another podcast tomorrow. Well, how about just taking the one you did today and blowing that up?
Well, Marley, the final question we ask every guest is, what does success mean to you?
Success for me, I answer it in 2 ways. Me personally is, I know I'm successful when my passive income is double my expenses. That's an old Robert Kiyosaki thing, because I think you're set, right? If your passive income is always just kind of rising, you can spend, you can do whatever you want, and you don't have to worry too much. But in business, how I know I'm successful is, my goal, whether it's me personally or any of our entities, is that the person who encountered us or me is better off than when they first met me. So for example, you spend 15 minutes listening to this podcast and you get off and you feel, I'm empowered, I'm inspired, you're better than when you got on, right? You're cranky and distracted. Or we throw a party for you and you're like, oh my gosh, we made memories forever, and you're so much better off. So to me, if that's at the core, that I just want people to be like, how is that not a win, right? If you're better, even if you're 1%, even if you're 0.25% better, that's an improvement. So I'll take it. So that's, to me, when I know we're successful.
Well, Marley, as we bring this to a close, is there anything you were hoping to share or get across that you haven't had a chance to yet?
Just know that failure is part of the process. Try not to be too hard on yourself. Be hard enough on yourself to focus and make the changes you need to make. But keep in mind that a couple easy changes will give you really great results. And then the other thing too, always I would say, is if you want more free advice, just go to my Instagram at The Profit Goddess, and you can find out kind of all kinds of tips and tricks, because I'm always sharing like, okay, guess what? Do not do this. That was a big miss.
Marley, thank you so much for a fantastic interview. And let's go ahead and jump into today's 3 key takeaways. So takeaway number 1 is when she described those forget-me-not expenses. I thought that was a great description. And she said there are 2 main problems with these forget-me-not expenses. Number 1 is that many entrepreneurs and owners don't take them into account. And number two is that these expenses are then not passed on to the consumer. Takeaway number two is sometimes entrepreneurs, and this is something I know I have fallen into and I've seen other clients over the years fall into, where you focus on revenue or increasing revenue instead of also or starting at evaluating expenses, because acquiring new customers is costly. So if you're able to just save $100 per month on, let's say, an insurance or internet provider, well, that compounds annually over time. And takeaway number three is to review your overhead. And our number one takeaway from the day was to look at all your recurring bank charges, credit card expenses, and debit expenses, where you have these monthly or annual recurring expenses, and review those. And just take a look, understand what they are, where they're coming from, and should you be changing that. And now it's time for today's win-win. So today's win-win is really tying back to Marley's book title and the whole concept of, are you making money or are you just busy? And I think that's a great question to ponder. Are you really making money, or are you just busy feeling like you're making money, but maybe your business checking account doesn't reflect that? And so I think that's a great way to close the episode today. And so that's the episode today, folks. Please make sure you subscribe to the podcast and give us a review. And remember, if you or anyone you know might be ready to franchise their business or take their franchise company to the next level, please connect with us at BigSkyFranchiseTeam.com. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to having you back next week.